How to love poetry. My name is MJ, and I actually have decided to start a video series. Right now I'm all about following what I'm passionate about, and other than actually writing a blog, which can get really boring and kind of dry, especially on this subject matter, I decided to talk about it because talking about it is a lot more exciting to me than actually just sitting around and, being like, oh, let me read this dissertation on poetry, because I got enough of that in college. I figure, why not have some real discussions about it? So anyway, I decided to do this video because I'm really passionate about poetry. I didn't like poetry until I went to college, and then I had a poetry class with a really, really awesome professor. He was so great. This series is all about following my passion. And so this first video, I want to discuss a specific poem and tell you a little bit about poetry and why I love it. How you love poetry is, I like to basically use an analogy when talking about poetry. Poetry is a lot like romance. There are a lot of people who try really hard at it and they don't quite get it. There are also a lot of other people who just sort of stumble into it and it works. Like romance, poetry is also something where you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you can find your true love. Sometimes there are a lot more frogs out there than there are true loves, and sometimes you get really lucky and you find your true love right off the bat. And what I mean by that is sometimes you read the most fantastic piece of poetry, or you find an author that you really like and it's the best in the entire world. You get it, you get goosebumps after you finish reading the poem. It's beautiful, it's fantastic. There's just nothing like it. It's literally like falling in love every single time you finish reading that poem by that author. Poetry is really super personal. Just like maybe I romantically am inclined to like a specific type of person, I am probably more inclined to like a specific type of poetry than maybe somebody else that I know. Maybe you'll love some of the poems that I love. Maybe you'll hate some of the poems that I love. Maybe you'll hate some of the authors that I love. That's totally fine. Poetry, again, it's like falling in love. There is no rhyme or reason to it, really. I feel like it's more about something that just calls to you innately. You can feel it in your spirit. You can feel it welling up inside of you once you've finished reading it and once you understand what these poems are really all about. I want to teach you how I love poetry. And I love poetry a lot. Poetry is an art in and of itself. And I think that's what I love most about it. I did go to college for poetry. It's so funny. Actually, I went for creative writing. I have my bachelor's degree in creative writing, so I know a little bit about this stuff. So first things first, in order to love poetry, you have to love music. Do you love music? Yeah, I thought so. The best way to discover what type of musical qualities are in your poems are to always read poetry out loud. You don't have to read it aloud the first time you read it, but you definitely want to read it aloud at some point. You will notice different subtle words that you didn't notice before. I always like to recommend having a pencil with you when you read poetry, unless you have a library book. You don't really want to write in library books. That's not very nice. But if you have bought your own book, I have lots of poetry books. You can write in the sidelines. You can make notes in the margins about which lines you like, which lines you didn't like. One more thing, I will not be imposing my view of what metaphors are in certain poems. That is what I didn't like about all of my English classes when I was in college. It doesn't make sense to me, because poetry is it's supposed to be a personal experience, just like literature. Bartleby the Scrivener, which is actually one of my least favorite stories in the entire world. We had to read that story like 4 different times with 4 different professors, and I really hated that story by the time I was done. Metaphors have sort of been done to death. If you want to watch this to get metaphors for certain poems so that you can talk about them with your friends, you're going to have to draw your own conclusions and use your own gray matter. So after that long rambling introduction, let me talk a little bit about the book that I'm going to be using for a little while. I'm using the Contemporary American Poetry book. This is what we used in my poetry class. It has a whole bunch of different authors in it. It has collected short works of their poetry. I love it. I love going through it and reading different poems and finding authors that maybe I didn't look at when I was in my poetry class. This poem is called An Upward Look, and it is by James Merrill. It's one of my favorite poems. It makes me so excited to read it. A couple years after I graduated, I was reading through this again, and I finally discovered it. Anyway, I think I'm just gonna read it, and we'll talk about it a little bit, and then I'll let you go. O heart green acre sown with salt, by the departing occupier, lay down your gallant spears of wheat. Salt of the earth, each stellar pinch flung in blind, defiance backwards now takes its toll. Up from his quieted quarry the lover, colder and wiser, hauling himself, finds the world turning, toys triumph's toxins into this vast facility. The living come, dearest to die in. How did it happen? In bright alteration, minutely mirrored, with the thinking of each and every mortal creature. Halves of a clue, approach the earth lights. Morning star, evening star, salt of the sky. First the grave, dissolving into dawn, then the crucial recrystallizing from inmost depths of clear dark blue. The format in this poem, I think, is incredibly important. First of all, there is no punctuation. There are some authors that will, when they're reading their own work, pause at the end of each line as though there was a natural pause in the rhythm of it. I like this one because you can read it 3 different ways. Bet you didn't know that. So you can read it the way that I read it first, or you can read down the entire left column, which reads like this. O heart green acre by the departing, lay down your gallant salt of the earth, flung in blind now takes its toll. Quarry the lover hauling himself, toys triumphs this vast facility, dearest to die in the bright alteration within the thinking, mortal creature approaches the earth lights. Evening star, first in the grave, then the crucial from inmost depths. Also then read the left side as though it were its own poem too, and that goes like this. Sown with salt, occupier, spears of wheat, each stellar pinch, defiance backwards, up from his quieted, colder and wiser, finds the world turning, toxins into the living come. How did it happen, minutely mirrored of each and every halves of a clue, morning star, salt of the sky, dissolving into dawn, recrystallizing of clear dark blue. Goosebumps. One thing I find interesting about this is that this poem can actually be read 3 different ways. It's technically, I like to think of it as 3 different poems within one poem, which may not be the correct way to read it, but you know what? I don't care. It's the way that I read it, it's the way that I like it, and I think that that is what makes it so interesting. I also like the fact that there is no punctuation, that you can read it out loud with a lot of pauses if you want to. You can read it aloud with no pauses, like I did if you want to. And then the capital letters that are there, the capital letters allude to the fact that there may be some punctuation insinuated. Another reason why I really like this poem is because it paints a really good mental picture. And for me, I think that's something that poetry really needs to do. I'm a very visual person, and I like to not only see the words on the paper, I like to see the pictures that the words paint in my mind. That's all I wanted to share with you today, was to sort of introduce this video and what I'm doing with the videos, and also to read a really awesome poem and share it with you, because I couldn't find any good YouTube videos with this reading in it, and I could not find it formatted correctly on any websites. And with this poem, I really feel like formatting truly matters. Hope you enjoyed. Check back next Sunday. I should be doing another one. I haven't decided what I'm doing yet, but we'll figure it out as we go. And hopefully you learned something, and if you didn't learn anything, then hey look, there's a cat. See you later.